Hello, everybody, and welcome to. I've been absolutely waiting for 2 weeks to have this conversation and to gather you around the table of transformation. This is our safe place. This is where we can talk. This is where we can share. This is where we can be resourced. This is where we can take our deep breath, move a little slowly. So do whatever you need to do to be with us tonight with your girls, the guys, our allies. Come on, guys. This is Selah. So this is what I want you to do. Please share this page now on your Facebook page. Please share now. All right. Invite others to be a part in the room. While we are preparing for our two presenters to be with us tonight, I want you to take a selfie and post it and send it wherever you need to send, whether it's a tweet, whether it's Facebook, whether it's IG. Say, I'm in Selah. I'm at the table of transformation. Where are you? Join us tonight. This is going to be an exciting night, ladies. And so you got your food, you got your snacks, you got your crew. Great. Now I want to present a short film like we usually do at the beginning of our Selah time tonight. Stories are important. They're important to our lives. Everything around us is a story. The soap operas, a story. You watch television, there's a story. You watch Hallmark, there is a story. The Bible is filled with stories where people share things. You know that the saying that says if the hunter only writes the story, you never hear from the hunted's point of view. And so we're going to talk about a bold and brave story that's going to be shared tonight. But first, I want you to watch this film.
I am a mother,
a father, son,
daughter,
brother,
a sister. I am a student,
a stay-at-home mom,
construction worker,
volunteer.
I am loving,
smart,
funny,
generous,
way too generous.
I am all of the amazing things you see.
But there's something you can't see.
or don't see.
Something that I don't let anybody see. Like when I'm alone.
In a room full of people.
You can't get out of bed.
And maybe I've gained weight.
Or lost weight.
Why do men always lose weight?
It can get dark in here.
really dark.
Addicted to food,
The web,
Work,
sex,
alcohol,
Something to take the pain away.
to feel happy.
To feel something.
anything. Nothing.
Because depression isn't a mood.
It's not a passing thing.
Or a bad day.
It's a disease. I can't just get over it. It feels like I'm underwater.
Drowning.
And sometimes I think you'd be better off without me.
I am telling you this. All of this.
Because I need help.
and you are my wife.
My dad,
My husband.
my kids.
My boss.
So please, don't judge me.
Leave me.
Fire me.
Please be patient.
Don't give up on me.
Just be there for as long as it takes.
Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't real.
Everybody has a story. Everybody has a story to tell. We have our perfect stories. That's our public stories. And then we have our private stories. And Dr. Monica A. Coleman, University of Delaware, author, extraordinary woman, has a story to tell, a very unique story. And she's here tonight to tell it. Come on. Welcome to the table of transformation, Monica A. Coleman. Yay. Y'all show us some hearts. Get some thumbs up. Happy that you're here.
Thank you, Bishop, for having me here this evening.
She is the professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware, spent over 10 years in graduate theological education at Claremont, the Center for Process Studies and Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago. She is a preacher. She's a theologian. She's a womanist. She's an author. And this is her book, Bipolar Faith. And she has agreed to tell her story tonight. Come on, let's give her a hand. Let's show her her hearts. Let's welcome her to Selah. So Monica, tell
Well,
us your story.
I was really moved by the video you showed because I feel like that's a big part of my story. That I was in deep pain and I didn't tell people, or people didn't notice, or it wasn't obvious from the outside. And so that's a big part of my story. But I wanted to tell the story as a Black girl story because I'm a Black girl. And a lot of it is about what it means to be African American, what it means to be an African American woman, what it means to be a person of faith. So I grew up believing that you could die of grief, that you could become so sad that you would just die of grief. I believe this because my grandmother told this story. My maternal grandmother told a story about being orphaned. She and her 8 siblings were orphaned when she was relatively young. Her mother died shortly after giving birth to the youngest girl, the youngest child. And she said, and 6 months later, my father died of grief. And so I imagined that it was kind of like the Grinch, where your heart gets so small that you die. And so I was like, wow, you can become so sad, you will die of grief. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I found out the real story. And that was that my great-grandfather committed suicide. And he actually enlisted the help of one of his children to pull a chair out from under a noose. And I was astounded because this was a story that many people in my family knew, but that's not how it was told to me. And I began to think, wow, who would have thought about the mental health of a sharecropper in South Carolina, in a small town in South Carolina? Who would ask, how are you feeling? Are you overwhelmed? Are you okay? When you're thinking about things like poverty, do your children have enough food? Are their shoes falling apart? Why can't we get ahead while we're still working on this farm? Are we going to keep our land, or is it going to be stolen from us by the white man or the white governmental system at the time? All of which were important factors in my family. And who is going to raise all of these children now that I don't have a wife? And that became important to me because it really put my own experiences in a larger context. And my experiences were just of a deep depression. But on the outside, I looked okay. On the outside, I was successful in school. I went to Harvard College for undergrad. I did well. I went to graduate school. I continued on to get my PhD. I looked like I was fine. I would even sometimes go to therapists and they wouldn't believe that I was fine because they said, oh, but you have a 4.0, you're okay. And I'm like, but I'm telling you that I'm sad. And I first noticed my sadness when my grandmother died, when I was 13 years old. And for me, she was probably my strongest connection to God. I grew up in a very religious family, a very church family. You brush your teeth, you go to church. It's just part of good hygiene. And so I grew up always going to church with my family. In fact, my parents grew up in church together in church school. That's how they met. And so when she died and I really kind of held closely to her faith, I felt betrayed by God because I wondered why God would take my grandmother away from me, because she was my safe place, the person who I felt really understood me and really understood my life. And there were parts of my life I didn't talk about. And so I grew up in a household, a very solidly middle-class household that was also a household of domestic violence. And so I also grew up very afraid of what would happen the day that my father killed my mother. And I thought about that from being a young child, all the way up probably until my mother left my dad. And so he was an alcoholic and he would become very angry, and I just always felt scared. And so that was part of what made me sad, part of what made me angry, part of what made me want to never be home. And I was trying to balance all of these things while still going to school, pursuing extracurricular activities, and feeling as if no one saw me. Why? Part of which I think is what many African Americans are raised to do. Never let them see you sweat, right? Don't let them see that you're not okay. I learned very early on in the forensics contest the Paul Laurence Dunbar poem, "We Wear the Mask That Grins and Lies." And so I wore this mask of being okay, of being happy. And sometimes I really was happy, of course, but I was also deeply sad and deeply depressed. And so here and there, I would tell friends, I would tell people I thought could help me, the parents of friends. And eventually it became so bad when I was 15 years old, I was suicidal. And I told the mother of one of my friends, and she told my mom, which was really what I wanted to happen. And my mother took me to get therapy, but my father, being very old school, was like, Black people don't do that. And so it lasted only as long as he figured it out on the insurance bill. And I only got a little bit of therapy then. And so I was able to get out of the house early, I thought. I graduated from high school, I went to college, and I was aware that I still had challenges, but I kind of found different ways around them. And I was also I kind of built in these strategies that I didn't know were strategies to help me manage depression. I was physically active, and so I had endorphins to work with. I continued to be a religious person, and I was active in college campus Christian organizations. I went to a local church, an AME church. And so I leaned very heavily into my faith because I kind of felt my faith come back to me after quite a while, and felt like, yes, I feel like God knows what I'm experiencing, and I can always talk to God about what's going on. I felt a call to ministry and answered that call, and was very a little excited, a little bit scared about doing what I felt God wanted me to do, and decided to go to seminary, to divinity school, where I could learn more about how to be a minister and more about religion, theology, ethics, all the things that you learn when you're preparing for ministry. But I was still sad. I still had this, I kind of described it as this undercurrent of sadness. I imagined it like a river that flowed right below the surface of my life. And that if you tapped even just a little bit, you would find the sadness there. But I still kind of kept managing to do different things in life. And I very rarely got a diagnosis, but I did go to therapy once I got to graduate school, because I was like, it might not be this cheap again. There are college campus counseling centers, and they give you this checklist, and you check off the checklist of symptoms. Yes, yes, no, no, yes, yes, no. And they would say, yes, yeah, you're depressed, or no, it seems like you're okay, or, well, do you just have some issues you want to talk about? And I did have issues I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about my childhood. I wanted to kind of just figure out how I was going to understand my relationship with my parents, particularly my father. And those were things I talked about. So I don't think anyone noticed that I had severe and recurrent depression, because it seemed like there were particular incidents in my life that I just needed to talk out. And this became particularly difficult and particularly salient for me when I was sexually violated when I was 21 years old. And that sent me, as it would send anyone, into a pretty deep depression that was filled with trauma. And I got help for that. And it was a really difficult time, because that was probably some of the most intense suffering of my life, especially with how difficult it was to talk about it. If I thought depression had a stigma, I really thought that rape and sexual violence had a stigma, and I didn't want people to know for quite a while. But I was able to get counseling through a rape crisis center. And the struggle I had at that point was that the suffering was so intense. I wanted to know, where are you, God? Very much the same question I asked when I was 13 and my grandmother died. If I'm suffering, where is God? Why is God letting me suffer? Why isn't God stopping this from happening? Why isn't God bringing people into my life who are going to keep me safe? And I hit a real block in my spiritual life. But I was a minister in training, so I had to keep going to church. And I was in divinity school, and I didn't have a plan B, so I said I better keep doing this. But I wasn't cool with God. I don't know that I was angry, because I'm kind of a Leo personality, so I just was like, I'm done. Like, I'm just not talking to you, God. So you can go do whatever God thinks, and I'm going to just say the words, but I'm not good. I'm not praying. I'm not studying my Bible. I got nothing for you. And I felt that way for a long time. And finally, I realized I could take my pain to God. And so I remember I drove out to a parking lot, to this park at night, which probably wasn't the safest thing to do. And I just screamed at God, and I hollered at God, and I cried before God. And that was my prayer. And I realized that God could handle my screaming and my aching and my ranting and my questioning. And that was when I began to rebuild my faith, because nobody had told me that part of the spiritual journey is losing your faith. That I always thought that was a bad thing, that you're not supposed to lose faith. You're supposed to keep faith and hold the faith. But it turns out that I lost my faith and I found it again. And that part of the spiritual journey is often losing your faith and finding it again, losing it and finding it again, and your faith coming back to you in a new way. So it did for me. And I found a very embodied faith, and I realized that, I lost God in many ways because of the violation that happened to my body. And it was through my body, for me, it was through dancing, that I was able to pray in that way and feel and worship God through my embodied movement and through connecting with my traditions. But there weren't really roadmaps for this. And most therapists were not able to help me with this either. They would just say things like, you don't have to forgive. And I'm like, okay, but Christians kind of think you should. So I have a problem with that. And it just wasn't particularly helpful. And people at church really didn't know what to say about sexual violence, about losing faith, about deep depression, most of which I didn't talk about. And I just somehow pulled myself out of it. I felt a call to become an activist in that arena. I told my story. I started a nonprofit to help churches and communities to work together to address sexual violence. And it was the hardest and some of the most life-giving work I have ever done. And I did that work for a number of years and went to graduate school. And unbeknownst to me, I left my entire support system. So all the things that I had created, not even intentionally, to be okay, to hold me up, to manage deep pain and depression, were gone. I didn't have a church community anymore. I didn't have friends. I didn't have dance because it was very far away from where I lived and where I studied. And it was like the bottom fell out. And I entered into a very, very deep depression. And that was coincided with an illness, not a major illness like a bronchitis, but a misdiagnosed bronchitis that kind of went awry. And I became very, very sick. And I finally called my mom and was like, I know I'm 20 something, but I need my mommy. And my mom came out and helped to take care of me. I was living in California at the time and got me through the illness. And I was able to, keep food down and feel strong again and make it back to class. But I was completely falling apart. And I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. I looked terrible. I wouldn't even show you pictures of me from that time. I had a job I could barely keep because I just was crying all the time. And finally, the person I worked for said, looks like you could use some help. And I said, I think so. And she took me to a pastoral counselor who took me to a therapist and who said, oh, this is more than I can do. And that therapist took me to a psychiatrist. And I was desperate. I just wanted to sleep. I just wanted to eat. I just wanted to feel better. I was probably very suicidal, much more than I had been at 15. I was not so sure about the medical system because they had just finished misdiagnosing me and I wasn't feeling very trustful of the medical system or sure about how insurance would work and what would happen. And I finally got to the psychiatrist and I was like, okay, look at here. I really don't want, to have medicine that's going to make me gain weight. I'm kind of afraid of that because that's not going to help depression. And I don't want medicine that's going to make me lose my sex drive because it's not about whether or not I'm having sex, but I should want to have sex, right? I'm like in my 20s. And so I don't really know how I feel about medicine. Everyone keeps telling me I have to take a pill for the rest of my life. And I just need some help. But I'm a smart person who needs help. I won't just do what you tell me. You need to talk to me and explain to me more of what's going on. And so I had this great talk with a psychiatrist. And as I told her my story, she said, every 2.5 years, you're having a really big problem. And I was like, wow, it is every 2.5 years. And she said, and not only that, but it's not just you have a difficult time with life events. There's grief that occurs with life events, but what you're experiencing is worse. It's deeper. It's harder. And right now, let's see if we can help you. And I was very unsure about taking medication. And I had a friend who said to me, well, Monica, if you believe that God is in everything, which I deeply do, then God is in the medicine too. And that was revolutionary for me because I said, okay, if I can trust the chair to hold me up, if I believe that God is in everything, then hopefully there's some God-inspired psychiatrists and scientists working in a lab who want us to feel better. And I got nothing to lose. So here we go. And I slept and I got my appetite back. And between talk therapy and psychiatric medication, I was able to become stable and somehow pull the rest of my graduate school program together with some bumps and hiccups in there. And that was a really big step for me because I wasn't even good about taking Advil for cramps, right? So it was a big deal for me to take this medication every day and to trust that it was going to be helpful and it was going to be meaningful for me. But I do believe that God is in the medicine, that God is in everything, and that it was going to be something that would be helpful for me. Well, as I went on in life, I continued to kind of work on my degree, and I was in a bookstore one day, and I was looking for stories about my experience. Right? I was looking for memoirs, for books by other people to say, oh my gosh, who has lived through this and can tell me what's on the other side? And I read books about depression. There was only one written by a Black person at the time, a Black woman, and none of the people were religious people. And I was like, well, that seems really missing because a big part of my story was wrestling with God, losing faith, finding faith, being a minister, praying a lot, sometimes feeling that my prayers were not answered, sometimes feeling like they were. And I just couldn't quite find what I was looking for. But while I was in that section of the bookstore, I found a book on bipolar. And I began reading the book, and I read about something called bipolar 2, which I had never heard of before. Bipolar is more commonly known as manic depression. And I heard about those who are manic depressives, where they have very high highs and you feel like you can fly off a building and you're indestructible, and you have very low lows. Well, I knew depression quite well. And I was sure I never had manias, but I read about something called bipolar 2, the number 2. And it talked about my life. I was reading the symptoms and what it was like. And I was like, that's me. It's this person who can do a bunch of stuff and can be productive and looks fine in the world, but isn't really inside. And so I called my psychiatrist and said, hey, I read this thing and it sounds like me. And it turns out it's much more difficult to diagnose because people only go in for the depression. That's the part that bothers us, not the lower level of mania. not this, for me, productivity that I experienced, this sometimes happiness, but just the depression. But because it was cyclic, because there was a pattern, and because I had this outside success, it was, she said, I thought that might be you. In fact, it might be the more common form of bipolar, but people don't know because people don't go to help. Don't get help, or you don't stay with a psychologist or therapist long enough to be diagnosed for when you feel fine. So what clinicians would call hypomania, or this mania, I called normal Monica, happy Monica. And some would say, but your normal Monica is not where everyone's normal Monica is, normal place is. It's a little bit higher up than where most people function. And I would say, you think so? Because it's just normal me. And they would say, yeah, normal you is not normal everybody. And apparently that's hypomanic Monica, but I still say it's normal Monica. But I do know depressed Monica. And it felt really liberating for me to have a diagnosis and to have a name for what I experienced, and to know I'm not the only one who has this experience. And that's when I began to hear the story about my great-grandfather. And I thought, wow, how many other people in my family have experienced these deep depressions? How many other people have been suicidal? Because TV will have you think that, it's this chemical imbalance and you're sad. You see those commercials with the usually woman in the gray tones. She takes a pill and then she's skipping to the meadow, right? About 30 seconds later. But it's not like that. And it's way more complicated. I feel like it's so much more complicated for African Americans because we have a history of trauma, slavery, sharecropping, racism, anybody. And that lives in our experiences. It lives in our memory. It lives in our genes. And we have experiences of war, and we have experience of violence. And all of these things, with whatever's happening in brain chemistry, are what make our stories sometimes very difficult. And I grieved because I don't think anyone asked my ancestor that, asked my great-grandfather, how are you doing? Do you need help? That wasn't something somebody would have asked a poor sharecropper in South Carolina, right, in the early 20th century. But I do believe that faith heals us. I think that's probably the best thing I want to say. Not like you just pray and you cast it out in the name of Jesus and it's gone. Oh, if only. In fact, I do consider depression to be my chronic illness, to be an invisible chronic illness, to be something that most people can't see, but that I live with and that I'll always live with. Am I always depressed? No, thank God. I'm not always depressed. But I do know that stress can lead to depression for me. And I know that sadness and grief can become depression for me. And that I have to stay on top of therapy. I have to stay on top of how I eat. I have to stay on top of how I work out and exercise. Do I do this all the time? Most certainly not. But I do know that I'm supposed to, and I do try. And for me, the solid belief that God is with me, that God loves me, that God holds me in the midst of my suffering means that even now my faith changes, but that part does not waver. And I do believe that me telling my story and talking with my family more about my story and sharing it more widely will reduce this silence and stigma that we often experience for those of us who look really capable, which I think is most Black women, because who's got choices? You always have to get up and go to work and take care of the family. We don't have the option, that's how I often felt, to just take a mental health week and, take a retreat for 2 months. We don't have that option. And so I got over that idea that I had to be strong and that this is part of what I live with and part of what I learned to manage and share.
Wow. I tell you, Selah ladies, this is where we give Monica a virtual hug to thank her for being open and vulnerable to share her story. And I know that you're being blessed. I know because I'm watching the comments. I know that you're being blessed. Many of you are identifying with parts of the story. They didn't tell us in seminary that after you have found your faith, you're going to lose it and then get it back and lose it and get it back, like we didn't read the book of Job at all, right? And all of that. But thank you for sharing so many wonderful points that you gave. You can read all of Monica's story in Bipolar Faith. I didn't know there was a bipolar too. I didn't know they had numbers. Mm-hmm. I just thought it was da 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 da. And I'm going to bring Dr. Jill Waggoner into our conversation, because there is a myth. There is a myth that somehow Black people don't have mental illness. I don't know how it started, where it started. Maybe it's because the strong Black man, strong Black woman, we can handle anything, take anything, drop babies and get back up in the cotton field, an hour later and keep working. If you haven't read Quincy Jones' autobiography, he talks about right in the very beginning about the myth of Black people not having wrestles with mental illness. His mother was committed when he was 7, and he talks about that music became his mother for him. That was his way out of whatever. But Henry Nouwen, for all the preachers who are watching, Henry Nouwen writes about the wounded healer. Everybody's got a story. Everybody has a wounding somewhere. Sometimes, like the bent over woman, you can see the wounding, but sometimes there are things that you cannot see, but you're wounded nevertheless. Dr. Jill Waggoner is a family practitioner, 20 years in practice. She's also certified as a wellness and nutrition, who's going to talk to us about all other kinds of things in this conversation. I want to welcome Dr. Jill back to Selah. Y'all come up, put your hands together. Let's thank Monica. Thank you for being at the table of transformation. And we want to welcome Dr. Jill back, who's going to share some other things with us.
So thank
Hi,
you.
Dr. Jill.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Glad that you've heard Monica's story, and I know that you've heard stories like Monica again and again and again. Not the same story, but maybe parts of those stories.
Yes. Monica, thank you so much for your story. Your book is amazing. You're a great writer.
Thank you.
And so I think that's great. But I just want to say a couple of things that Monica said in her. I was listening to her and I just jotted down some words that I think are important for us to hear. One, she said successful. She said 4.0. She said middle class. She said depressed, domestic violence, suicidal, religious, not talking to God. All of those things in one person. And so we are taught to believe that if you got all of that going on, why on earth, if you're successful with a 4.0, would you also always also be sad? And so often people will say to people who have depression or other things, so what are you sad about? Because they don't really understand what to do. I think it's important for us, a couple of things that you said, like you said, Bishop, you'd never heard of bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. And so because bipolar has now become part of our vernacular, oh, she's bipolar. People think that if you're sad one day and happy the next, then you must be bipolar. This is something that is much more extensive than that. I think that's important to know. We are watching it play out on the national stage right now. There's a young man who's running for president who we are watching him have his manic episodes on in front of the world. So bipolar 1 is usually just mania. So those are people who are on top of the world. They're euphoric. They think they can fly. They sometimes even think they're God. Really in the throes of mania. And then there are people, like you said, who are bipolar 2, which is what you are, who are people who have these hypomanic episodes where they feel great. They don't feel like they're God, but they feel great. And then they have these extensive lows. So I think that's very important for people to know that there is cause for what's going on. So I wanted to talk about that. I also wanted to talk about signs and symptoms, because if I am your girlfriend, if I am your sister, if I am your husband, your mate, how do I know when there's a problem? Well, if you think you're God, you know there's a problem. I mean, it's pretty obvious. But so many of us don't think that depression is real. And so we say to the people who are depressed, oh, pray a little harder or make up your mind to do different. And my favorite one is just think positive. And so we are giving people these directions about things. You cannot just change your mind and turn off depression. You have to understand when it is an extensive period of time. So Bishop, you asked or said at the beginning, when do we know that it's time to go get our girlfriend out of bed? If she's been in bed a week, it's time to go. Because something is going on. Is it a reactive depression? Is she bipolar? It is not your responsibility to diagnose her or him. It is your responsibility to help them get to a place where they can get diagnosed. So I think it's very, very important is that you are not called to diagnose. You're only called to help. So I think those things are important. And then,
Dr. Jill, can I add one part I didn't share was how helpful my friends were.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, how helpful they were in saying, you need to tell your mom, or you need to tell people who care about you.
Yes.
Or I will go with you sometimes, or just calling every day just to make sure if my friends were long distance.
Right.
Like, I can tell from the sound of your voice that you're not okay.
Yeah.
And even just having people who know you and see you that's what keeps me afloat now, right? People who it's not a whole lot of people, but people who know from the sound of your voice if you're okay or not, and then check on you and make sure you're calling your therapist is what keeps me afloat every day.
Those hear your voice is very important, because now we text each other and we think we've checked on each other. It's not the same. If I hear your voice and I know you and I love you, I can just hear you say hello and know something's wrong. So that brings up the point that it's so important to hear each other's voice. Make a phone call. Call her, call him. Because now, particularly because we're isolated, when we go through these kind of crises, people will decompensate. So here's a new word, everybody. It means you were doing okay with whatever you were dealing with. It may be depression, it may be bipolar disorder, and then this crisis comes on top of what you've been dealing with already, and now you're not doing well anymore. You decompensated. You have fallen apart for you. And that's important for people around you to know, because when you are in the throes of mental illness, be it severe anxiety or depression or mania or any of those things, you often cannot help yourself. So you need somebody that can help you to get to the place that you need to be in order to help yourself.
And then, Dr. Jill, friends have to be sensitive enough to know that when your brother or your sister do reach out to call, they're double checking their reality.
Right. So when I hear from you and I am in the throes of depression or any of that, and now I'm talking to somebody else, now I'm touched by the outside world, it may help me become aware, oh my gosh, I'm not functioning. Oh my goodness, I haven't combed my hair or taken a bath in, 3 days. That's important and that's real. I also want to say, Bishop, that, and I think, Monica, it was great. I think that we often or sometimes think because we have our faith that we don't have psychiatric illness.
So there are no more problems, right?
I was like, me and Jesus are cool. I just need a doctor.
you know, so sometimes we think that. And then on the other hand, sometimes when you go to the medical establishment, because you have your faith, they think you're crazy. So it is a sometimes an interesting line to walk when you are trying to seek help and figure out what to do. I also think it's important to say that if you go to the first therapist or the first doctor and they don't respond to you or hear you, you may have to get another, and sometimes another, and sometimes another, until you get somebody who can hear you. Because if you are not heard, then you cannot be helped. So I think that's real important.
Wow. Well, we have more. Selah ladies, don't go away. We have more coming up with Dr. Jill and Monica. Dr. Jill, we're going to need to know about some foods. Are there different foods that may be triggers? Help us with a little bit of our nutrition and some more. Monica's story is powerful, and we just want to put those hearts and those hands in places to thank her for sharing. Don't forget Bipolar Faith. And Reverend Jazz, we are ready for some announcements. There's some things that are coming up. First thing I want to remind you is that we have a survey, and the survey will be, please take the survey link. It'll be in the chat so that you can do that. This is important because you help us with our demographics. When you take the survey, it helps us to identify the subjects that you want to talk about and to hear, and even more. In our survey from when we ask about how you were doing during this pandemic, the first thing was a lack of exercise. The second was a lack of sleep. The third was improper diet. So we need to be working on taking care of ourselves, sisters. You can't take care of anybody else if you're not taking care of yourself. This is where you put your own mask on first, remember, before you put on somebody else's mask. And so when we ask you questions in the survey, it helps us to provide the resources for you, because Selah is the safe place to talk about stuff that we don't talk about, that we do need to talk about. And that's why we're talking about what we're talking about tonight. Got it? And so there's somebody else who needs to be in on this conversation. You text them right now, send them the link. Send it to your Facebook page or other way, tweet it, because there are other people who need to be a part of this conversation and hear what we're talking about and the stories talking about. Reverend Jazz, we have some fun coming up, because what's the point in having all these deep, wonderful conversations, but we also have to have some fun. Hey, Reverend Jazz.
Hey, everybody. So I wanted to share with you tonight, of course, about our at-home party. I'm sorry to all of the men that are watching tonight, but this at-home party is strictly for the ladies. We have planned an amazing at-home virtual party experience. And tonight, I just want to give you a taste of the entertainment that the ladies will be able to enjoy in our private party.
I don't let folk now kind of like dictate where I go and what I do. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to tell you just go to anywhere. But what I am saying is, go places. Remember one day after a show, me and my manager, we went to this restaurant. We was trying to catch the Rockets. Rockets were in the playoff. And we shot there to the restaurant, and a lady sitting on the other side of the bar, because that's where the TV's at. The TV's there. So we go up to the bar, and I was just sitting there, and I look over, and the lady was just looking at me like this. And I say, ma'am, is there a problem? She said, it is. I said, well, what's the problem? She was like, I know who you are, and it's people like you is the reason why other people don't go to church. And I said, man, what did I do? She said, yeah, you all on that gospel show, and you in here sitting at the bar. I say, ma'am, I'm here to watch the game. And furthermore, I'm not the reason why people don't go to church. People don't go to church because they don't want to. And then I had to tell her, hey, I mean, I didn't die on that cross. That cross too big for me. It don't even fit me. I'm a 42 long. I didn't shed any blood. I'm anemic. You can't even receive my blood. How all of a sudden I'm the reason? Yeah. And then I had to order a drink because she had ran my blood pressure up.
So on August the 24th, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, we're going to have none other than gospel comedian Marcus D. Wiley. And so how many of you know that laughter is also a medicine? And so we are just going to take a break from all the COVID stress. We're going to get together with the ladies, and we're going to have our private online party. Here is how you can register for this party. And this party is open to all women. I want you to send this link to not only your friend circle, but the girlfriend that you know that you want to reconnect with. Make sure that you register to participate in this private virtual experience. We're going to have some virtual games. We're going to be able to share with you when you register your party pack so that you can get prepared for this moment. In order to register, you have to visit that link there, and I'm going to make sure that it's also in the chat for you to click and make sure that you're a part. You want to go ahead and do it as soon as possible. As I said, this event is going to take place August the 24th at 7 p.m. and it's absolutely free. So why not come and enjoy with us? Also want to make sure that you get your Selah t-shirt. I have mine on tonight, and this is how you can get yours as well. We talked about it last week, but I want you to know that there are a few shirts still left. And so if you want to go ahead and get your Selah tee for the party, this is how you can do so. And so just make sure that you go ahead and grab it tonight because, of course, the supplies are absolutely limited. And then if you're not already a part, there are some extra tips, some things, some fun, some networking that we do in the Selah Online VIP group. This is a private group that you have to go ahead and request to be a part of on Facebook. And so make sure you are part of the community of women that are engaging online in the Selah Online VIP group. We want to shout out those that have been walking. This has been a walk challenge that was established in the Selah VIP group. And those of you who have reached that 100-mile mark, and then in the app that is part of this challenge, you're going to receive this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful jewelry. And so we talked about that tonight in the group. So if you want more information, go back and watch the pre-chat that takes place before this Selah Online experience. And I would be remiss if I did not leave you with this last message here. Support Selah. The Selah Online Home Edition is just one of many leadership encounters for women that Bishop McKenzie is able to bring before you, and she's able to do so solely by your support. You can do so through Cash App, or if you want to give by other means, just let us know. Reach out to us, and we will let you know how you can do so. Turning it back over, because you know we have to dig deep into some additional conversation tonight. Yes, and I'm excited to hear what's going to happen. So make sure you register. I'll see you at the house party.
Yes, and I'm going to bring my oil and the laying on of hands. But Marcus Wilde is not a stranger to us. And we just had a conversation with him earlier tonight, and he is writing special material for us, ladies. And so we have laughed our ways 3 times with Marcus, and he's coming back for the 4th time. Those who register, you will get information about bringing your faves to the table, the games that we're going to play, and other kinds of fun things we're going to do. It is a private Zoom. That means that we just going to be usses talking with usses and laughing and having a great time. Now I want to bring Dr. Jill back up, and don't forget to please thank both of our presenters today. Dr. Jill, come on and help us with some things that we can do for ourselves.
Well, You know, you were talking about exercise and walking. With any mental disorder, particularly things like anxiety, depression, any of those things, there have been a number of studies, and the data indicates that in some instances, exercising on a regular basis is as effective as medication. Now, that's not to say that everybody can control it without medication. And if you need medicine, medicine is a good thing. But anything that you can do to make your brain function better, that's what you want to do. And then you specifically asked me about food. And, you know, food is so important to me. And I think that we often underestimate the power of food. So particularly for bipolar disorder, I want to give you this: bipolar disorder, depression, any of those things. One is monounsaturated fatty acids, very good for the brain. Most of the brain is actually fat. And so when you consume good fats, that makes the brain cells more sensitive to some of the pleasure chemicals like serotonin. You can get those monounsaturated fats from things like avocados. Another thing is folic acid is very, very good for the brain. And they have actually, as you know, now many women, or most women, when you're pregnant, they tell you to take folic acid because that helps the brain and the neural tube to develop properly in the fetus. It also, folic acid continues to help the brain as we are adults and we continue to grow. You can find folic acid in beans. So lots of beans in your diet. Brazil nuts are very, very good. They're rich in selenium, and selenium, they're good in selenium. They're high in vitamin B, magnesium, and zinc. All of those things boost your mood. So you want to have lots of Brazil nuts. Dark chocolate is good. You have to be careful. I know, right? You have to be careful with dark chocolate because it has, you know, sugars in it. But we've known forever that it was good for the heart. But it's also high in something called phenylethylamine, which elevates your mood. So that's why a lot of times when women are premenopausal and their progesterone plummets and they start to feel sad right before their cycles, they crave chocolate because it helps their brain to feel better. Liver, if you're not a vegan or vegetarian, liver is good in folate. Again, we talked about folate or folic acid earlier. Salmon, we know, is high in omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory and very good for the brain. Walnuts, very high in B6, vitamin E, folate. It helps to regulate serotonin. Things that you want to stay away from. Things that you want to stay away from.
And you gonna tell us those things? And it's probably everything that I like, right?
Sugar, caffeine, alcohol. You want to make sure you limit your alcohol. Some people, when they start to have issues with sleeping, they will do a cocktail at bedtime to help them sleep. Alcohol will put you to sleep, but it disrupts your sleep pattern. So you'll wake up more frequently and you don't get really good rest. Salt, particularly if you are on something like lithium, which is a mood stabilizer, which is sometimes still prescribed to people who are bipolar or have bipolar disorder. Salt really disrupts the functioning of lithium, and high fat, the wrong kind of fat, is just not good for your body. Neither is it good for your brain.
Wow. So there goes my Lay's classic potato chips, and
all things in moderation, Bishop.
well, you know, I'm not the veggie girl. I'm just not the veggie girl. And never, you know, remember you were at Selah and you gave us this little test to find out whether you could taste some things, and I found out I'm the one that tastes everything. So
you are bitter.
Yeah, everything is bitter. And so, you know, all the veggies are just not my favorite. And for those of you who find that, you know, you were the kid that when your parents weren't paying attention, you would throw the peas under the table and you would feed the cauliflower to the dog. And yes, and you also gave the dog, we grew up with dogs. So, you know, that, you know, all who knew exactly who to sit next to. who ate everything that I didn't want to eat.
Yeah.
I have found that if I juice it, I can do it. So
Well,
if I put the spinach and the cauliflower and the stuff and I juice it, then I can. And so all those non-veggie people out there, there is a solution.
You can put a little bit of fruit in there to blunt some of the green, because a lot of the green vegetables have a little bit of bitter. That's a bitter back taste. Some of us who are not super tasters, we love that green. And so we'll have a smoothie and go, oh my gosh, isn't this delicious? And other folk are looking at you like, what is wrong with you? And there's a reason for it. Like you said, we shared that at Selah years ago.
Yes, you did. And I thank you. And, I have discovered I can just juice it and crunch it up and just, people say, you slow down. I said, no. This has to go fast. If it's going to get in at all. Dr. Jill, thank you. I want to bring Monica back into the room. Ladies and gentlemen, because the brothers are our allies, are paying attention today, and they're also sharing things in the chat about, one person said, my friends called my mother, So it's important to have a wonderful support network that you build of people who can not only hear your voice and know something, but also can look in your eyes and see that when they say, how are you? I'm fine. And your eyes are all, it's all in your eyes, is in your face. And so it's great to have a support network. And for me, it is great to be able to provide Selah to talk about stuff that we should talk about, that we don't talk about. And I thank you for being brave and bold and sharing your story. So before we get ready to say goodbye, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience?
Which one would you like for us?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to Monica and then to you, Dr. Jill. I'm sorry, Dr. Monica. Anything that you would like to share before we conclude? This has been powerful, absolutely powerful.
I was thinking of the last thing you said about how important it is to have friends, right, who know us and the sound of our voice and the look in our eyes. And I also want to add, and when we are well, we can be those friends to our friends, right? We should be the ones who, not a whole bunch of people, but there's those people who how they sound, and you check in on them, because you'll know that when they're good, they're going to check in on you. And so it's really, that's what it means to be community, right? And this is what it means to be faith community, is to have people who will check on you, and to also sometimes be that person who checks on someone else and knows the sound of their voice. So that was my last thing to add, and to say you can grab the book Bipolar Faith anywhere you buy books. Not supporting any particular place. I love independent booksellers, but you can also get it from your large online booksellers. And you can follow me on social media at Rev Dr. Monica, Instagram. I'm on Twitter a little bit less, but lots of vegan food on Instagram for the veggie people. And I'm on Facebook at Rev Dr. Monica. And to find out more about me and online classes I offer, you can go to monicaacoleman.com.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Monica. And Dr. Jill, she's a veggie girl too.
I am. You can follow me at askdrjill.net. And I just wanted to say that, I have a supplement line. I think it's important that if we're going to do supplements, we do the right one. We've just added an anxiety support. So people who have anxiety, which is a herbal combination that can help with that, and also a sleep support, which is a combination of herbs that can help you with sleeping, because a lot of people are experiencing insomnia during this time. We also are offering a vitamin D. I'm telling everybody, take your vitamin D, take your vitamin D. It is critical for the functioning of your immune system and the modulation of your immune system. We also have an immune support as well. A number of books. If you follow me at askdrjill.net, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. And sometimes I even put one or two of my meals on there too, Dr. Monica.
I watched. Dr. Jill was doing a Facebook presentation to show us how we can make the vegan meals ahead of time, and it wasn't as hard as people make it out to be. I watched. I'm almost there.
I did meal prep yesterday because my daughter's getting married next week, and so we have so many things to do. I did meal prep yesterday. It takes me about 2.5 hours to fix meals for the week for 5 people. So if you learn how to do it, it's not that difficult. It is really not that difficult. And so for a lot of people, you can figure out how to do it, get you a menu, decide what you want to do, and just have that good, healthy food available. Then it takes some of the stress out of your life.
Yeah, and you can go to my old Instagram and see my vegan meals approved by my toddler. So
That's good.
I think it said hashtag toddler approved because she's, my kid will make a kale smoothie if I leave the room.
Yeah.
Oh, that's probably the best time to introduce it, unless you run into a little Vashti who will feed all that green thing to anybody else who happens to walk by at an inopportune time. And when your mama says you're going to sit here until you eat it all, and everybody leaves the room, they found it about a month later when it starts to smell under the rug. So, but anyway, I don't want to. Let's embrace the things that's going to help us stay healthy. And our 2 presenters really shared a lot with us tonight. Thank you for sharing your questions and your support and letting us know that these things that tonight really was important for you to hear. This will be on replay. And so if there is a brother, a sister, a neighbor, a friend who really need to hear this conversation, then you can direct them back to the Selah Leadership event page, and they can hear it on the replay. We want to be able to touch every household, every person who needs to hear this message, because we are in stressful times. This pandemic is really wreaking havoc with people's nerves and anxiety and the stress of not knowing when the next shoe is going to drop. But you got some great resources today to be able to help, and we want others to know the same. So Selah, you know that I love you. If you take a look in the chat portion, you'll find out where you can support our ministry. It's right above me. If you would just do the Cash App, and we can do a whole bunch of other things that we are trying to do more. Don't forget the house party on August the 21st, which you have to register for. Get Map My Walk app, and when you download it for free, look for Selah 100 and register to be in the walk. Already we've been walking for 8 weeks, and already we have 2 women who have walked 200 miles already. Woo! Okay. I'm not one of them, but I'm trying real hard. Okay. And we have a whole bunch of people on the leaderboard who have already reached their 100, and we are so very proud of them. Before we say goodbye, I want to bring another person in the room. And Raven Jones, where are you, Raven? There she is. Raven Jones has worked this summer as our production assistant, and she's on her way back to college. You are a junior. Tell everybody where you are and what your major is, what your year is.
Well, I attend the Grambling State University. I am a business marketing major, and I should graduate in 2022.
All right, and congratulations. She's been our Selah production assistant. She's been putting all these technical skills on her resume. Yay. And then we also want to share her good news. She has received a scholarship from the National Organization of Black County Officials Incorporated. And these are persons who serve as county commissioners, county judges, who happen to be of African American descent. And she received a scholarship. And we want to thank Helen Holton, who is the executive director, and everybody whose hand was in it to be sure that Raven has some funds to go back to Grambling State University with. So Raven, we love her. Come on, give her some hearts and some congratulations. Give her some hearts and some congratulations. And you go do good, okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
All of these Selah ladies here, they have friends at Grambling State. They have friends near Grambling. They're going to be calling your name to be sure you're going to be all right. You're going to have more attention than you ever care to have. But much success in this coming year. Much success. All right, Selah ladies, it has been wonderful. I will see you in our private house party on August the 24th. And then we'll be back with Selah, the home edition, in September. On September the 10th, we will have Chelsea Hayes from the Coach Factory. And our topic is going to be Black, Bold, and Bankable. Money, 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 money. Money. So I see you back in September. All right. God bless everybody. Don't y'all laugh at my singing.